Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. This video is a follow-up to the one I made a few hours ago. It is really a continuation, and I thought it made sense to divide that podcast into two parts. So what I talked about before is why I regard myself as being brown and not white. And I do. I do. I mean, after all, if my Arab and especially Palestinian sisters and brothers are defined as being brown, then why should not I, as a fellow Semite, not regard myself as brown as well? I mentioned my dentist in Kansas, who was a Palestinian woman. And if I did not know any better, I would have assumed that she, like me, was an Ashkenazi Jew. She looked like an Ashkenazi Jew. We are both Semites. The barriers that keep Arabs and Jews apart are entirely artificial. Race itself is artificial. Race, as I mentioned before, is entirely made up. It is a social construction in the US that began with slavery. And of course, not all societies have a concept of race. India, for example, has caste, not race. Most of sub-Saharan Africa has tribe, not race. Same thing is true in much of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So race is not a universal construct. Not all people think in terms of race. When I was in Central Africa, I was regarded as a European. The first time someone referred to me as that, I said, "Oh, no, I'm not a European. I'm an American." And the person kind of laughed and said, "Well, here, that means that you are a European." And I said, "Okay, that's how they see it. If you do not belong to a tribe in much of sub-Saharan Africa, then you are a European." Many African Americans who traveled to sub-Saharan Africa were disappointed. They expected to be welcomed as fellow Africans. Instead, they were welcomed as Europeans. So again, it's a very complex situation when trying to understand race. Why? Because it literally makes no sense. There is no rationale behind race. It's not understandable. It's based purely on bigotry. There is no way of justifying it, of rationally explaining it at all. It is pure and total hatred. And that is what I learned in my travels around the world, and especially as a sociologist, talking to my students about race, which is something that I addressed in the previous podcast, so there's no need to repeat it here. What I wanted to say here was that although I do define myself as brown all the time, with no exceptions, I recognize by the same token that I benefit from white privilege. Not to do so, I think, would be an act of complete and total immorality. I know that when I walk down the street, if there is a police officer passing me. I am not afraid of that police officer. I am not likely to be stopped and frisked by that police officer. I had a student maybe 25 years ago. He lived in a place called Leawood, which is in Johnson County, Kansas, a part of the suburban area of Kansas City. He told me that at least once per week, he was stopped by the police when he was driving and questioned. He was asked, "Why are you here?" He said his response was always the same, "Because I live here." And then the police would generally ask him to provide documentation, which he would, and then they would let him go. What a hassle. That has never happened to me. Nobody has ever stopped me when I was driving and asked why I was there. Even when I have driven through African American neighborhoods, just hasn't happened. People who are defined as white have what we call in sociology white privilege. I hate white privilege. I hate it. If there were a way for me to take it and throw it into the trash and burn it, I would. And I am not lying. I don't want it. If African Americans don't have that white privilege, then neither should I. So let's change the focus a bit while staying on the same basic theme. Israel and Gaza. Both Semites, right? Israelis, for the most part, are Semites, and Gazans, for the most part, are also Semites. They look very similar to each other because they are both Semites. And yet, people who are Palestinian and people who are Arab in general are commonly defined, at least in the US, as being brown. Whereas Jews, like myself, are more often defined as being white. That label is not just a label. It comes with a whole list of privileges, such as I mentioned before. I am not burdened with being harassed by police officers because I am seen as not being white. I am seen as being white, even though I wish I were not. But that is not something I have any control over, so there really is no point in my even talking about it. But I'm aware of it. Most people who are white live in the first world, the relatively wealthy parts of the earth. People who are Arab, including Palestinians, generally live in the third world. Gaza is a third world area. You can't even call it a nation because it has no status as a nation state. Israel has over and over again prevented the Palestinians from establishing Palestine as a nation state. That lies on Israel's shoulders. So when Hamas came in and conducted its assault, it was understandable. It was not good. I don't like to see anybody die, but it was understandable. If you are being held a prisoner, a hostage, you literally can't get out. All of your food, all of your water, all of your fuel is being provided by the Israeli regime. What is your alternative? What is your alternative? Hamas is the protector of the Gazans. And no matter what you may think about what Hamas did in invading Israel, what they did was an act of protection of the Gazans. In other words, they were doing their job. Why don't most people in the world blame Israel as much as they blamed Hamas? Increasing numbers of people are. Global sentiment is rapidly turning against Israel, which I'm happy about. But still, Gazans, from a US perspective, are seen as brown. Most, but not all, Israelis, again from a Western perspective, are seen as white. And so they have white privilege. There is even a problem with racism within Israel itself. For example, there are some Jews in Israel who are black, like those from Ethiopia, for example, and they are badly discriminated against. They are not treated well at all. I remember seeing a demonstration on YouTube where these black Jews, and they are Jews, they were accepted into Israel because they are Jews, were marching down the street carrying Black Lives Matter signs. I must admit that astounded me. I never thought that I would ever see Black Lives Matter in Israel, but there it was. There it was. I don't know what has happened since that time. I don't know whether those black Jews have gotten more rights. I do recall that however much I may despise the man, Benjamin Netanyahu was upset at the way black Israelis, Jews, were being treated. And he committed himself to dealing with that problem. Whether he actually did, I don't know. But it did surprise me that he reacted the way he did. Still, I look at myself and I realize I am no one. I am literally no one. Who cares about me? I'm an elderly, retired professor living on the Mexican border. Who cares? Who cares? No one should care because I don't care. The people I care about are the Palestinians, and right now, especially the Gazans, because the Gazans, who are regarded, at least in the US, maybe in Israel too, as being brown, do not have the same rights as the majority of Israelis who are seen as being white now. I have seen pictures of Jews and Gazans from West Asia, often called the Middle East or the Near East, placed side by side. And I could not tell which one was Palestinian and which one was Jewish. I literally could not tell. To me, there was no discernible difference between them. The differences, as best I could tell, were entirely imaginary, and for good reason. Again, race is a social construction, as is tribe, as is caste, as is nationality for that matter. And yet, because of the white privilege that is enjoyed by the Israelis, the mostly white Israelis, they use that white privilege to discriminate viscerously, harshly against the brown Gazans. In reality, both the so-called white Israelis and the Gazans are both brown. They are both brown, as am I brown. I mean, if you want to take the social construction of race consistently, and although I recognize that race is a fabrication, I think if you're talking about it, you need to be consistent. Then you need to recognize that Palestinians and so-called white Israelis are brown, uniformly brown, just as I am brown. It is so sad. I wish there was something that I could do to better the situation of the Gazans. I suppose I am not as courageous as Abraham Weisfeld, who has traveled to that area and stood alongside his Palestinian brothers and sisters. I don't think I have that courage. I don't. Well, even saying I don't think is wrong. I know I don't have that courage. I know it because I know myself. Now, theoretically, I suppose, before the war started or the terrorist campaign started in Gaza, I could have traveled to Gaza. I could have, not now, but then. But I don't know what I would have done. I don't know. I suppose I could have stood right next to my Palestinian brethren and taken the rubber bullets along with them, I suppose. And just so you know, rubber bullets is a misnomer. They are not really rubber bullets. They're called that, but they are much stronger than rubber bullets. A person could be severely hurt. Killed, I don't know, but hurt, yes. Really, really hurt, really injured by those miscalled rubber bullets. So standing in the line of fire and having Israeli Defense Forces fire so-called rubber bullets at you, you are risking your life. You are literally risking your life. And Abraham Weisfeld, whom I respect immensely, has been someone, as the leader of the new Bunds movement, anti-Zionist Jewish movement, who has been willing to go to that part of the world and meet with and talk with Palestinians. Is he the only one? No, there are other Jews, both Western and Israeli, who object to Zionism and who have met with Palestinians. Sadly, however, their numbers are very few. And Zionism in Israel is really, really powerful. I mean, it's powerful in the US too. Very powerful in the US, but nothing compared to its power in Israel, where you have an entire government committed, now it would seem, to wiping out an entire population, to committing genocide, the great Holocaust of the 21st century. How dare they? How dare they? How dare they? I make these podcasts over and over again. I add new things to them each time, so I'm not constantly repeating myself. But I realize that much of what I have said now is what I've said in the past as well. I realize that. But all I know to do as a guy living in deep South Texas is to produce these podcasts where I encourage people, not only Jews, but everyone, including Christian Zionists, who are Zionists for an entirely different reason, as I talked about in another recent podcast. To all those people to give their commitment to Zionism a second thought, to examine their hearts and to ask themselves, am I a human being? Am I a human being? That's a really important question. Because if a person supports the Holocaust of the 21st century, in my view, that individual is genuinely not a human being. A Homo sapien, by a technicality. A human being, meaning someone with humanity? No, not at all. So it is very sad for me because as someone from a non-practicing Jewish family, and a lot of Israelis themselves are non-practicing Jews, Benjamin Netanyahu is a non-practicing Jew. But that doesn't seem to matter. What matters is land. Land. More land for settlements. Then once they take over Gaza in their imaginations, I think, definitely, then they will have all the land they want in Gaza because the Gazans will be gone. Do I think that will happen? No, I don't, because I think that the spirit of the Gazans is strong and they will resist the attempts by Benjamin Netanyahu and his government to force them out of their homeland. They are a very courageous people, much more courageous than me. I sometimes see myself as a coward. Maybe that's not true, but in comparison with some people, I do see myself as a coward, whether rightly or not. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.